Operation Saint Nick, Chronicles of Duncan Wallace. Chapter 1. Festive Beginnings. Duncan Wallace stepped into the Comcast Tower, the weight of his heavy boots echoing through the grand lobby. The building, an impressive structure of glass and steel, loomed over the bustling city streets, now adorned with the festive glimmer of Christmas lights. Beside him, his loyal companion, a sturdy German shepherd named Klaus, matched his pace, his keen eyes surveying the surroundings. The lobby was transformed into a winter wonderland, a stark contrast to the usual corporate sterility. A gigantic Christmas tree stood at the center, its ornaments glistening under the warm glow of holiday lights. Garland and mistletoe hung in elegant swaths from the balconies above, and the air was filled with the scent of pine and spiced cider. Duncan's eyes briefly traced the intricate decorations, but his mind was elsewhere. The festive atmosphere stirred memories of past Christmases, times when laughter filled his childhood home, now silent in the wake of his father's recent death. The joy around him felt alien, a reminder of what he had lost. Klaus, sensing his master's somber mood, brushed his head against Duncan's hand, offering a silent, comforting presence. Navigating through the crowd, Duncan's gaze landed on his mother, Emiko Wallace. She was engaged in conversation with a group of elegantly dressed guests, her laughter light, but lacking its usual warmth. Even from a distance, Duncan could see the sadness that lingered in her eyes, a mirror of his own grief. Their shared loss had created an unspoken bond, yet also a chasm of unaddressed pain. As Duncan made his way toward her, his attention was momentarily caught by the lively on-screen banter between two well-known TV hosts, Chris Rubio and Ed McAndrew. During this episode of NGBN TV's Decades, they were engaged in a spirited debate over Christmas songs. Jingle Bell Rock is the fucking king of Christmas songs, Ed. It's upbeat, it's catchy, and it doesn't make you want to fall asleep, he argued, his words filled with the now well-known Rubio attitude. Bullshit, Rubio. You need to appreciate the classics. Silent Night is where it's at. It's got history, it's got soul. It's not just some contemporary bullshit, Ed shot back, his hands animated as he finally flipped off Rubio, as was his signature. Their argument, though trivial, brought a fleeting smile to Duncan's face. It was a brief respite from the melancholy that had gripped him since he had entered the building. Pushing through the crowd, Duncan finally reached his mother. Emiko's face lit up at the sight of her son, but her smile was tinged with sadness. They exchanged a few words, the usual pleasantries, but the conversation felt hollow. The unspoken words, the memories of Christmases passed with a father and husband, hung heavily between them. As the evening wore on, Duncan found himself increasingly unsettled. It wasn't just the weight of his father's absence. There was something else, an undercurrent of tension that seemed out of place amidst the revelry. He chalked it up to his own state of mind until he noticed Klaus's behavior. The dog was usually unflappable, but now he was alert, his ears pricked up, his nose twitching. He was attuned to something that Duncan couldn't perceive, a signal that something was amiss. Duncan patted Klaus's head, trying to reassure the animal, but the sense of unease only grew. It was in this festive setting, amidst laughter and the clinking of glasses, that the first signs of impending danger began to manifest. It was subtle at first, a flicker of a shadow here, a muffled sound there, easily dismissed as the product of an overactive imagination. But Duncan, trained to trust his instincts, couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. He scanned the crowd, his trained eyes picking up on small anomalies, a guest whose eyes darted around too nervously, a waiter who lingered a little too long. These were the faint whispers of danger, easy to miss in the cacophony of celebration. As the party continued, the festive lights casting a warm glow on the faces of the guests, Duncan Wallace remained alert, feeling for his concealed sidearm, his senses sharpened. He was unaware that these moments of merriment were the calm before the storm, the last breaths of normalcy before chaos would descend upon the Comcast Tower. Chapter 2. Unexpected Turn. The festive atmosphere of the Comcast Tower's Christmas party was violently ruptured by the sudden, jarring eruption of automatic gunfire. The staccato bursts tore through the air, a deadly symphony that transformed the scene from celebration to carnage within seconds. Guests, moments ago lost in laughter and conversation, now screamed in terror, their movements frantic as they scrambled for any semblance of shelter. Duncan Wallace, his instincts immediately kicking into high gear, pulled Klaus, his German shepherd, tightly to his side. They ducked behind a large ornate planter, its girth offering a semblance of protection. His heart pounded like a drum in his chest, adrenaline surging through his veins as he took in the chaos unfolding before him. The intruders, a cater of heavily armed men, moved with chilling precision. They were a stark, menacing contrast to the festive backdrop, their guns spitting fire and death. Their leader, Wolfgang Eisenwald, stood in the midst of this maelstrom, an island of calm in the turbulent sea of panic. His cold, calculated gaze surveyed the room, orchestrating the violence with clinical detachment. Near the entrance, a young couple, caught in the initial spray of bullets, lay in a grotesque heap. The woman's once sparkling dress was now marred by the harsh reality of bullet wounds, her lifeless eyes staring into nothingness. A man, trying to shield his partner, had slumped over her, his efforts futile against the barrage of lead. "Jesus fucking Christ," Duncan hissed, a surge of anger battling the rising tide of fear within him. He needed to stay calm, think strategically. Any rash action could be fatal, not just to him, but to the others trapped in this nightmare. His eyes frantically searched for his mother, Emiko, finding her paralyzed with shock near the grand Christmas tree. Her vulnerability in that moment struck a chord of terror in Duncan's heart. He had to reach her to ensure her safety, but the path was a minefield of danger. Eisenwald's voice, unnervingly calm and authoritative, cut through the cacophony of cries and gunfire. "Nobody fucking moves. This building is under our control, and you are now all a part of Operation Saint Nick," he announced, his men systematically herding the guests into a tighter group. The ease with which he wielded his power was as terrifying as the violence itself. Duncan, realizing the opportunity presented by the terrorists' focus on securing hostages, signaled to Klaus. They moved with stealth, their bodies low to the ground, using the pandemonium as a cover. Duncan's training, a lifetime of preparation for moments like these, guided his every move. As they weaved through the bedlam, Duncan couldn't help but note the lethal efficiency of Eisenwald's men. They weren't mere thugs. Their tactical gear, their disciplined movements, all pointed to military-grade training. And Eisenwald, amidst this orchestrated terror, seemed almost at peace, his commands cold and precise, a stark and horrifying contrast to the warm, festive surroundings now tainted with blood and fear. Finding momentary refuge in a deserted service corridor, Duncan allowed himself a brief pause. His mind raced, mapping out the building in his head, recalling every corridor, every exit. This knowledge was his edge, and he intended to use it to its fullest. He had to disrupt Eisenwald's plan, whatever it was, and protect the innocent people caught in this nightmare. Klaus, sensing the gravity of the situation, stayed close to Duncan, his senses alert. "We're in some deep shit now, boy," Duncan murmured to his companion. The dog's low growl in response was a testament to their shared readiness. As he prepared to take on this unexpected and deadly challenge, Duncan felt the enormity of what lay ahead. He was outgunned and outnumbered, but resolve steeled within him. He wasn't going to let these terrorists win. The Comcast Tower, with its corridors now echoing with the sounds of terror and violence, had become an unlikely battlefield, and Duncan Wallace was ready to fight back with every ounce of his being. Chapter 3. The Hunt Begins. In the once vibrant halls of the Comcast Tower, the festive decorations now seemed to mock the grim reality unfolding within. The cheerful echoes of the Christmas party had been brutally silenced, replaced by a tense, oppressive silence. Duncan, with his German shepherd, Klaus, moved through the shadowed corridors with a stealth that belied his size. His senses were acutely attuned to every noise, every potential threat that lurked in the darkness. The first encounter with one of Eisenwald's men came suddenly, a lone guard stationed near a service elevator. The guard, burly and distracted by a crackling radio, was oblivious to the danger that approached. Duncan, a blend of shadows and silence, closed in. Klaus, sensing the imminent confrontation, remained behind, his eyes fixed intently on his master. In a swift, decisive movement, Duncan incapacitated the guard. The struggle was brief, a muted scuffle of bodies before the guard lay unconscious on the ground. "One down," Duncan whispered, a mix of relief and resolve in his voice. Klaus came forward, his tail giving a slight wag in acknowledgement. Duncan quickly stashed the guard in a utility closet, his hands working efficiently to relieve the man of his weapons and radio. Tapping into the radio communications, Duncan's brow furrowed as he listened to the chatter about Eisenwald's plan regarding top-secret innovative AI technology. They were working to gain control of the building's security systems. "Fucking great," Duncan muttered, the challenge ahead becoming increasingly complex. Moving deeper into the building, Duncan and Klaus encountered another of Eisenwald's henchmen. This time, the element of surprise was lost. The terrorists spotted them and opened fire, the sound of bullets echoing harshly in the confined space. Duncan, reacting with trained precision, took cover and returned fire. His shot was accurate, bringing down the henchman with a perfectly placed headshot. The confrontation, though necessary, weighed heavily on Duncan. He was a soldier, trained for combat, but the reality of taking the life was never easy. Yet he knew this was not the time for hesitation or remorse. His mother, along with the other hostages, depended on him. Klaus remained a constant presence by his side, a silent, reassuring companion during the chaos. Time was not on their side, and Duncan knew he had to act quickly. Eisenwald's hold on the building was strengthening with each passing minute. As they navigated through the building, the grotesque juxtaposition of the cheerful Christmas decorations against the backdrop of violence was stark. The corridors, once welcoming and adorned with holiday spirit, now felt oppressive, the air thick with the scent of gunpowder and fear. Bloodstains marred the festive decor, a harrowing reminder of the brutality that had invaded this space. With each step, Duncan's determination grew. He was deep in hostile territory, but he was not without advantages. His extensive training, his intimate knowledge of the building's layout, and Klaus's unwavering loyalty were his assets in this deadly game of cat and mouse. Duncan's thoughts often drifted to the hostages, especially his mother. The fear for her safety fueled his resolve, but he also knew that any misstep could be catastrophic. He had to be smart, calculating, and always one step ahead of Eisenwald and his team. The festive atmosphere that had once filled the building now seemed a distant, almost surreal memory. The once joyous corridors had transformed into a labyrinth of danger, each turn potentially hiding a new threat. The contrast between the holiday cheer and the current state of terror was jarring, a cruel twist of fate on what should have been a night of celebration. With Klaus at his side, Duncan was more than just a lone fighter. He represented resistance, a stand against the darkness that had descended upon the Comcast Tower. This battle was one he had never expected, a fight against a terror that had brutally intruded into a space of joy and celebration. But he was committed, driven by a deeper sense of duty, and a resolve to protect the innocent lives at stake. As he moved silently through the building, Duncan was acutely aware of the responsibility he carried. This was no longer just a mission for survival. It was a fight for justice, a battle to reclaim the safety and sanctity of the place that had been so cruelly violated. With Klaus's steady presence by his side, they were ready to bring the fight to the enemy. An enemy who had no idea of the fury that was coming. Time to bring the yippee-ki-yay to these motherfuckers, Duncan mused to Klaus. Now, Duncan and Klaus, sharing a knowing look, knew it was time to do what they did best. Chapter 4. Hostage. The Comcast Tower, not long ago filled with festive joy, now echoed with the sinister sounds of Eisenwald's operation. Duncan, with Klaus at his side, navigated the dark, foreboding corridors, each step taking him deeper into the heart of the crisis. The once merry decorations hung limply, overshadowed by the grim reality of the situation. As they moved, Duncan's thoughts were constantly on the hostages, especially his mother, Emiko. The personal stakes were impossibly high. He knew he had to be cautious, strategic, and above all, effective. Any mistake could be fatal for him and catastrophic for the hostages. Duncan's path led him to an overlooking balcony on the upper floor, giving him a view of the main lobby. Below, he saw the hostages huddled together, fear etched on their faces. Among them, he spotted his mother, her face a mask of stoic fear. His heart clenched at the sight, but he forced himself to focus on the task at hand. It was then that Eisenwald's voice echoed through the building's communication system, addressing not just the hostages, but also Duncan suspected him directly. To our unseen guest, Eisenwald began, his voice dripping with icy control. "I admire your tenacity, but let's not pretend this will end well for you. Surrender now, and perhaps I'll be merciful." Duncan clenched his jaw, a mix of anger and determination flaring within him. He grabbed a nearby walkie-talkie and responded, his voice steady. "Not a chance, fucker. You're going to have to do better than that." A tense silence followed his words. Then Eisenwald chuckled, a sound that sent chills down Duncan's spine. "Very well. Let the games continue." Duncan knew that each passing moment put the hostages in greater danger. He had to keep moving, keep disrupting Eisenwald's plans, but the emotional toll was mounting. The sight of his mother among the hostages, the sound of Eisenwald's taunting voice, it was a lot to bear. He took a deep breath, trying to steady his racing heart. His tactical mind battled with his emotional responses, each vying for dominance. He couldn't afford to let emotions cloud his judgment, but at the same time, he couldn't completely shut them out. They were a reminder of what was at stake. Moving away from the balcony, Duncan and Klaus continued their silent trek through the building. The festive lights seemed to flicker mockingly, casting eerie shadows on the walls. The Christmas music, still playing over the building's speakers, now sounded grotesque, a twisted soundtrack to the nightmare unfolding. As they rounded a corner, Duncan's thoughts were abruptly brought back to the present. Gunfire erupted from down the hall, the sound jarringly loud in the confined space. Duncan reacted instantly, pulling Klaus back and taking cover. Peeking around the corner, he saw several of Eisenwald's men advancing. They were sweeping the floor, likely searching for him. Duncan knew he couldn't take them head-on. He needed to be smart, use the environment to his advantage. Retreating quietly, Duncan found a service room. Inside, he quickly formulated a plan. Using the building's maintenance systems, he could create diversions, manipulate the environment to disorient Eisenwald's men. It was a risky move, but it could give him the edge he needed. He set to work, his fingers moving deftly over the control panels. Lights flickered off in certain sections, alarms blared in others, and elevators moved autonomously. The building itself became a weapon in Duncan's hands. As the chaos ensued, Duncan and Klaus slipped out of the service room, moving in the opposite direction of the disoriented terrorists. Each step was measured, each decision calculated. Duncan was a man on the edge, balancing on the fine line between strategic thinking and emotional turmoil. Through the dimly lit corridors, past the holiday decorations that now seemed almost macabre, Duncan pressed on. His mind was a whirlwind of tactics and worry, a constant cycle of planning and concern for his mother's well-being. The Comcast Tower had become a fucking battleground. And Duncan, with Klaus by his side, was in the eye of the storm, fighting a battle that was as much emotional as it was physical. The stakes were personal, and failure was not an option. Chapter 5. Allies in shadows. The situation in the Comcast Tower was escalating, each moment more perilous than the last. Duncan, with Klaus faithfully by his side, pressed on through the dimly lit corridors, now a labyrinth of danger. The festive decorations, once symbols of joy, were now grim reminders of the night's horrific turn. Duncan knew he couldn't do this alone. He needed help. In a secluded stairwell, he pulled out a secure phone, a lifeline to the outside world. He dialed a number he knew by heart, the number of a fellow sentinel of justice, Thomas Whisper Wagner, who had contacts in law enforcement. The phone rang, each tone echoing in the stark, concrete stairwell. "Thomas, it's Duncan. Listen, I'm in deep shit here," he whispered urgently when the call connected. "The Comcast Tower is under siege. I need you to relay information to the police, but keep it quiet. No fucking SWAT teams storming in. There are hostages, including my mother." Thomas's response was swift and serious. "Got it, Duncan. I'll do what I can from here. Stay safe, man." Ending the call, Duncan felt a flicker of hope. With Thomas on the outside, they stood a better chance. He and Klaus resumed their stealthy advance, moving towards the heart of the building where Eisenwald's men were concentrated. As they crept forward, Duncan overheard a conversation between two terrorists. Hiding behind a set of decorative panels, he listened intently. They were discussing parts of Eisenwald's plan, something about AI technology and a data heist, using the building's high-tech infrastructure. Duncan's brow furrowed. This was bigger than just a simple hostage situation. Pushing forward, Duncan suddenly found himself face to face with another of Eisenwald's men. The encounter was brutal and immediate. The terrorist spotted Duncan and lunged, a knife glinting in his hand. "Fuck," Duncan exclaimed, barely dodging the blade. Klaus leaped forward, his jaws snapping at the man, giving Duncan the split second he needed. With lethal efficiency, Duncan disarmed the attacker, then delivered a crushing blow. The man crumpled to the ground, his head smashing the concrete with a sickening thud. Blood pooling from the back of his head, he now lay unmoving. Breathing heavily, Duncan looked down at the fallen terrorist. This close-up violence was jarring, the reality of death stark in the man's lifeless eyes. But there was no time to dwell on it. They had to keep moving. With each step, the weight of the situation bore down on Duncan. He was walking a tightrope of tactical precision and raw, emotional drive. The knowledge that his mother was one of the hostages added a personal, harrowing edge to every decision he made. The building felt like a twisted version of a holiday nightmare. The cheerful Christmas tunes playing over the speakers now seemed grotesque, a cruel soundtrack to the violence and fear that had taken over. The decorations, once bright and inviting, now cast eerie shadows, transforming the familiar corridors into a maze of uncertainty and danger. Duncan and Klaus, their bond stronger than ever, moved with a singular purpose. They were not just fighting against Eisenwald and his mercenaries. They were fighting against the clock, against the growing sense of dread that threatened to overwhelm them. What began as a joyous and peaceful night had turned into a scene of violence and death. And Duncan, caught in the center of it all, was the reluctant hero, driven by a desperate need to save his mother and the other innocent lives at stake. Each moment was a battle, not just against Eisenwald's forces, but against the emotional turmoil that raged within him. Chapter 6. Memories and Motives. The eerie silence of the Comcast Tower was punctuated by the distant sounds of chaos, a stark contrast to its earlier festive atmosphere. Duncan, with his steadfast companion Klaus, moved cautiously through the dimly lit corridors. The cheerful holiday decorations now appeared macabre, serving as a grim backdrop to the unfolding violence. As they progressed, Duncan was suddenly besieged by a rush of memories. He saw himself, years younger, enduring the grueling rigors of military training. His father, a decorated veteran, had been his mentor, instilling in him not just the skills, but the mindset needed for survival. "Remember, son, keep your fucking head when everyone else is losing theirs," his father would say with a stern but encouraging nod. These words echoed in Duncan's mind, a steady beacon amidst the storm of chaos. Flashes of his father's laughter, the wisdom in his advice, and the warmth of his pride all flickered through Duncan's thoughts. These memories, though painful, reignited a fierce determination in him. He was fighting not only for the hostages, but also to uphold the values his father had ingrained in him. Elsewhere, Wolfgang Eisenwald, notoriously known as the Wolf, was a man whose past was as dark as the intentions that brought him to the Comcast Tower to orchestrate his sinister plan. Eisenwald, once a member of the German Special Forces, had evolved into something far more dangerous. His elite military training, combined with a sociopathic disregard for human life, made him a formidable adversary. His descent into criminality was marked by a string of increasingly violent and elaborate schemes, culminating in the current siege. Duncan and Klaus continued their cautious advance, navigating through areas heavily booby-trapped by Eisenwald's men. The corridors had been transformed into a deadly maze, each step potentially their last. Then, without warning, they'd walked into an ambush. Bullets tore through the air, ricocheting off the walls with a deafening roar. "Fuck!" Duncan shouted, throwing himself and Klaus behind the scant cover of a steel column. Plaster and debris rained down on them as they narrowly avoided being shredded by gunfire. In a lull in the shooting, Duncan risked a glance around the corner, quickly squeezing off a return volley. He heard a thud and a muffled "fuck." One of his shots had hit its target. He knew, however, that this brief respite would be short-lived. Eisenwald's men would soon regroup for another attack. Amidst the gunfire and chaos, Duncan's thoughts flashed to his mother, Emiko. Her image, both frightened and resilient among the other hostages, fueled his resolve. He couldn't falter now, not when she and so many others were counting on him. Pushing forward through the smoke-filled corridor, Duncan and Klaus maneuvered through the rubble. The building seemed to moan in protest, its structure defiled by the violence it now contained. The cheerful Christmas music, still playing through the building's sound system, was a grotesque contrast to the gunshots and screams, a jarring soundtrack to their grim reality. The holiday lights flickered and cast ominous shadows, transforming the once familiar and inviting corridors into a labyrinth of danger and uncertainty. Duncan's training, honed under his father's strict tutelage, kept him focused and precise in his movements. His father's teachings echoed in his mind, guiding his every decision. In this relentless game of survival, Duncan was more than a soldier combating a terrorist threat. He was a son, driven by the values and memories of his father, and a protector, determined to save his mother and the innocent hostages. The Comcast Tower was a war zone, and Duncan was fighting not just for survival, but for honor, family, and the protection of all those trapped in this nightmare of Eisenwald's making. Chapter 7. Midpoint Confrontation. The Comcast Tower, once bustling with festive energy, had transformed into a treacherous battlefield. ECHOTALES, adorned with Christmas decorations, now bore witness to a starkly different reality. Duncan and his loyal companion Klaus navigated this perilous terrain, driven by a mix of tactical acumen and a deep-seated need to protect. The confrontation with Eisenwald's right-hand man, Richter, marked a pivotal moment in Duncan's mission. Richter was a hulking brute, his face carrying many scars from battles past, his eyes cold and merciless. When he and Duncan clashed, it was a collision of brute strength against honed skill. "Son of a bitch," Duncan spat as he narrowly dodged a vicious swing from Richter. Klaus, despite his injury, was quick to react, lunging at Richter with a fierce growl. The ensuing struggle was intense and raw. Duncan, using every ounce of his training, grappled with Richter, their bodies slamming against the walls. The fight was a brutal ballet of punches and counterstrikes, each man vying for the upper hand. Finally, with a swift, precise move, Duncan landed a crushing blow to Richter's jaw, sending the giant of a man crashing to the ground. unconscious. Panting heavily, Duncan stood over Richter, his heart pounding in his chest. This victory was significant, but the cost was clear. Klaus, injured in the fray, looked up at Duncan with pain-filled eyes. "I'm so sorry, pal," Duncan murmured, his voice thick with emotion. He gently stroked Klaus's head as the German shepherd struggled to his feet, still in the fight, the bond between man and dog more evident than ever. Meanwhile, Wolfgang Eisenwald, growing extremely frustrated from his command post, felt a surge of anger. Duncan's unexpected resilience was proving to be a significant nuisance. Eisenwald's face twisted into a scowl as he grabbed his radio. "Find this fucker, and that goddamn dog," he screamed to his men. "And end this. He's just one fucking man with his fucking dog. Take them out." Duncan knew the stakes had just risen exponentially. With Klaus injured and their position compromised, they needed to adapt their strategy. Stealth and cunning were more crucial than ever. The direct confrontations had to be avoided at all costs. The building around them felt like an entity of its own, its festive lights flickering in a haunting rhythm, casting long, ominous shadows across the corridors. The cheerful Christmas tunes playing through the building's sound system were an ironic soundtrack to the night's events, a stark contrast to the echoes of gunfire and the shouts of Eisenwald's men. As they moved deeper into the heart of the building, the weight of the situation pressed heavily on Duncan. The responsibility to save his mother and the hostages, the need to protect Klaus, and the burning desire to thwart Eisenwald's plans were a relentless burden. His mind raced with strategies, constantly adjusting to the ever-changing dynamics of this deadly game. The corridors, once familiar and welcoming, now seemed like a labyrinth designed to disorient and trap. The festive decor, meant to celebrate and bring joy, now appeared surreal, almost mocking in the face of such peril. Duncan and Klaus, despite the odds stacked against them, pressed on. Duncan was not just fighting a battle against a well-equipped and ruthless enemy. He was fighting for something much more personal. He was a son, honoring the legacy of a father who had taught him the meaning of courage and duty. He was a protector, determined to shield the innocent from harm, especially his mother, Emiko. This fight was as much about upholding these ideals as it was about survival. In the heart of the Comcast Tower, a place that should have been filled with joy and laughter, Duncan waged a war not just for his life, but for the lives of all those entwined in Eisenwald's sinister plot. The night had turned into an ordeal of endurance and resolve, and Duncan was at its very core, a figure of defiance against overwhelming odds. Chapter 8: Tide's Turn. The Comcast Tower, a vivid part of the Philadelphia skyline, echoed with the sounds of a war zone. Duncan, his resolve as solid as the steel beams of the building, navigated the chaos with Klaus, who, despite his injuries, refused to leave his side. The festive decorations, once symbols of holiday cheer, were now the backdrop of this night of terror that continued to unfold. In a dimly lit corner, Duncan received a critical piece of intel from his Sentinel of Justice teammate, Thomas. The message was brief but game-changing. Eisenwald's plan involved accessing a top-secret government database containing AI integration technology housed within the building. Fuck me, integration of AI with humans and synthetic human-like beings has the potential for so many ramifications. "This is so much bigger than I thought," Duncan muttered, realization dawning on him. Eisenwald wasn't just after ransom or revenge. He was after classified information and technology that could wreak havoc on the world. He wanted to play God. Armed with this new knowledge, Duncan knew he had to act fast. He formulated a plan, a daring and risky maneuver that could turn the tide in their favor. But first, he needed to create a diversion. He set off an improvised explosive, a concoction of maintenance chemicals he had found in a utility closet. The explosion was deafening, sending a shockwave through the nearby corridors. Alarms blared, adding to the chaos as Eisenwald's men scrambled to investigate the source of the blast. Seizing the moment, Duncan sprinted down an adjacent corridor, Klaus limping at his heels. Their movement was a blur, a race against time and enemy forces. They turned corner after corner, the once familiar hallways now a labyrinth of potential ambushes. As they rounded a bend, they were met with a hail of bullets. "Shit," Duncan exclaimed, diving for cover behind a fallen table adorned with Christmas ornaments. Bullets shredded the decorations, sending shards of glass and tinsel flying through the air. Duncan peeked from his cover, now carrying a more suitable weapon taken from a fallen terrorist, firing back with precision. Each shot was calculated, a product of years of training and battlefield experience. One of Eisenwald's men fell to the ground with a thud, his curse cut short by Duncan's bullet. But there was no time to celebrate the small victory. Duncan knew they were sitting ducks in their current position. He grabbed Klaus, and they bolted down the corridor, dodging gunfire. The chase was intense, a deadly game of cat and mouse through the decorated halls of the Comcast Tower. They turned into an office, barricading the door behind them. Duncan's heart pounded in his chest, his breaths coming in short, ragged gasps. He scanned the room, looking for another exit, a way out. That's when he saw it, a vent leading to the building's HVAC system. It was a tight squeeze, but it was their only choice. As Duncan and Klaus crawled through the narrow passageway, the sounds of Eisenwald's men searching for them faded into the background. The vent led them to a maintenance area on another floor, a temporary haven from the relentless pursuit. Duncan paused, taking a moment to catch his breath and check on Klaus. The dog's injury was slowing him down, but his spirit remained unbroken, his loyalty to Duncan unwavering. "We're close, boy. We're going to stop these bastards," Duncan whispered, a mix of determination and concern in his voice. Emerging from the maintenance area, Duncan knew the next phase of his plan would be the most dangerous yet. He needed to reach the building's central server room, the heart of Eisenwald's operation. Stealth was no longer a possibility. This was going to be a head-on confrontation. As they made their way to the server room, Duncan's thoughts were a whirlwind of strategy and anticipation. The stakes had never been higher. He wasn't just fighting to save the hostages or to honor his father's legacy. He was fighting to prevent a global catastrophe. The server room was heavily guarded, Eisenwald's men stationed at every entrance. Duncan took a deep breath, steeling himself for the fight ahead. "Let's do this," he said to Klaus, a grim resolve in his eyes. What followed was a blur of gunfire, shouts, and the clash of hand-to-hand combat. Duncan was a force of nature, his every move driven by a desperate urgency. He took down Eisenwald's men one by one, his training, his rage, and his fear merging into a singular focus. The server room door finally lay before him, the key to ending Eisenwald's plan. He kicked it open, ready to face whatever lay on the other side. But as he stepped into the room, the realization hit him. Eisenwald was always 2 steps ahead. The room was rigged, a booby trap set to eliminate anyone who dared enter. In that split second, Duncan threw himself backward, pulling Klaus with him as the room erupted in a massive explosion. The blast sent him flying, his body slamming against the opposite wall. Chapter 9. Under Siege. Dazed and disoriented, Duncan lay amidst the debris, his ears ringing from the explosion. The server room, thought to hold the prized information that Eisenwald sought, was now a smoldering ruin. Pain and confusion coursed through Duncan's body, each breath a sharp stab. Klaus, lying beside him, whined softly, equally shaken but alive. "Fuck, that was close," Duncan gasped, struggling to his feet. He knew they were lucky to be alive. Eisenwald's tactical shift was clear. He was fortifying his control of the building, setting traps at every turn. The stakes were escalating, and time was running out. With a grimace, Duncan checked Klaus's injury, ensuring it hadn't worsened. The dog's loyalty and resilience were a constant source of strength. Together, they moved on, deeper into the heart of the building, now a fortress under Eisenwald's merciless grip. The corridors were eerily silent, the festive music and decorations a sick contrast to the scenes of devastation around them. Duncan moved with caution, each step deliberate. The explosion had revealed his location, and he knew Eisenwald's men would be converging on them. In another part of the building not found on any blueprints, a room filled with high-tech computers and rows of synthetic humanoid beings, Eisenwald monitored the situation, his frustration mounting. "This fucking guy is like a cockroach," he snarled to his second-in-command. "But even cockroaches have their limits. Increase the pressure. I want him, and that sweet little fucking puppy eliminated." Back in the corridors, Duncan used his surroundings to his advantage, turning the building's infrastructure into his arsenal. He set up makeshift traps, using broken electrical wiring and debris to create obstacles. He was a master of guerrilla warfare, turning the tables on his pursuers. As he and Klaus navigated through the darkness, a moment of reflection washed over Duncan. The magnitude of the situation, the lives at stake, and the sinister goal of Eisenwald, it all weighed heavily on him. He remembered his father's teachings about keeping focus under pressure, about making sacrifices for the greater good. These lessons now guided his every move. The building seemed to respond to the unfolding drama, its once inviting halls now a treacherous maze. The Christmas lights flickered intermittently, casting long, haunting shadows. The air was thick with the smell of smoke and fear. Suddenly, Duncan was jolted back to reality by the sound of approaching footsteps. He and Klaus pressed themselves against a wall, blending into the shadows. A group of Eisenwald's men passed by, unaware of their presence. Once the coast was clear, they continued their stealthy advance. Duncan's mind was a relentless machine, constantly strategizing, planning his next move. The knowledge that his mother and the other hostages were still in danger fueled his determination. The festive atmosphere of the building now seemed like a distant memory, a cruel joke in the face of such danger. The corridors, once pathways to celebration, were now routes to an uncertain fate. But Duncan pushed forward, driven by a resolve that was unbreakable. This was no longer just a mission to save hostages. It was a personal battle against a ruthless enemy. Duncan, with Klaus by his side, was not just fighting for survival. He was fighting for justice, for retribution, and for the chance to put an end to Eisenwald's reign of terror. The Comcast Tower had become the arena for a deadly game of survival, and Duncan was at its very core, a lone warrior in a fight against overwhelming odds. Chapter 10: Desperate Measures. The air in the Comcast Tower was thick with tension and the acrid smell of smoke. Duncan, battered but undeterred, navigated the corridors with Klaus, whose injured leg was slowing them down, but not dampening his spirit. The festive decorations, now tarnished and covered in debris, served as a stark reminder of the night's relentless violence. Duncan knew he had to make a bold move, a risky venture that could turn the tide. He formulated a plan to save the hostages, including his mother. It was a gamble, but he had run out of options. "It's now or never," he muttered to himself, steeling his nerves. He made his way to the main hall, where Eisenwald was holding the hostages. Sneaking through a service duct, he saw the scene below. His mother and the others were huddled together, fear and exhaustion etched on their faces. Eisenwald's men patrolled the area, their weapons at the ready. Taking a deep breath, Duncan prepared to drop into the hall. "Stay here, Klaus. I'll be back for you," he whispered to his faithful companion. Klaus licked his hand, a silent show of solidarity. Duncan dropped from the duct, landing with a roll. He sprang up, firing his weapon in quick succession. The element of surprise worked in his favor as several of Eisenwald's men fell before they could react. "Get the fuck down," he yelled to the hostages, his voice a commanding presence amidst the chaos. A firefight ensued, bullets ricocheting off walls and shattering the remaining festive ornaments. Duncan moved with lethal precision, his every shot aimed at killing his enemies. He was a whirlwind of determination, a lone force amidst a sea of adversaries. During the firefight, Duncan locked eyes with his mother. The fear in her eyes was palpable, but so was her trust in him. It was a fleeting moment, but it fueled Duncan's resolve. He couldn't let her down. Suddenly, a sharp pain exploded in Duncan's side. He grunted, feeling the warm trickle of blood. He'd been hit, but he couldn't stop now. Ignoring the pain, he continued to advance, pushing back Eisenwald's men. As the last of the terrorists in the hall fell, Duncan quickly ushered the hostages toward the exit. His mother embraced him briefly, a mix of relief and worry in her eyes. "Be careful, get those bastards," she whispered. Duncan nodded, turning back to the heart of the conflict. He knew Eisenwald wouldn't give up easily. The battle was far from over. As he made his way back to Klaus, Duncan's mind was a torrent of emotions and pain. The injury was bad, but he pushed through it, driven by a deep-seated sense of duty and the need to end Eisenwald's reign of terror. The building, a war-torn edifice, where the cheerful Christmas music mixed with the sound of gunfire and the shouts of combat made for a holiday nightmare that resembled a Hollywood action movie. The festive lights flickered erratically, casting ominous shadows that seemed to dance in the chaos. Duncan reached Klaus, who greeted him with a soft whine. Together, they prepared for the next phase of their mission. Duncan knew the final confrontation with Eisenwald was imminent. He was ready to face whatever came next, to put an end to this nightmare. The night had turned into a harrowing ordeal, a testament to Duncan's resilience and determination. The Comcast Tower had become the stage for a deadly showdown that Duncan Wallace was determined to win or die trying. So many lives were in danger if Eisenwald succeeded with his malicious plan. The stakes were higher than ever, and Duncan with Klaus, both wounded, were ready to face the final challenge. Chapter 11. The Final Stretch. In the shadowed, bullet-scarred hallways of the Comcast Tower, Duncan and Klaus, his steadfast German shepherd, moved with lethal intent. The festive decorations, now hanging torn and stained, were a grim mockery of the building's former cheer. The air was heavy with the stench of gunpowder and blood, a stark testament to the night's brutal violence. Duncan's mind was a whirlwind of strategy and raw determination. Eisenwald's plan was nearing completion. The servers located deep in the heart of the building held information that, in the wrong hands, would jeopardize the world and life as we know it. Every moment mattered now. Each action was critical. As they neared the room that held the artificial intelligence technology, the heart of Eisenwald's operation, Duncan felt a surge of adrenaline. He was ready for the impending confrontation, his every sense attuned to the danger that lay ahead. Klaus, injured but unyielding, growled lowly, sensing the tension in the air. The first sign of resistance hit them like a storm. Eisenwald's men, armed and ruthless, appeared from the shadows, their guns blazing. "Motherfuckers," Duncan cursed, diving for cover as bullets whizzed past. He returned fire, his shots a deadly retort to the ambush. Klaus, undeterred by his injury, lunged at the nearest assailant, his powerful jaws clamping down on the man's groin. The terrorist screamed, "My fucking balls, my fucking balls," dropping his weapon as he tried to shake off the ferocious dog. The firefight was chaotic and relentless. Duncan moved with a blend of desperation and tactical precision, taking down Eisenwald's men one by one. Blood sprayed, bodies hit the floor, the sound of gunfire, and cries filling the air. Reaching the AI technology room, Duncan carefully entered the room. Inside, the room was an impressive array of technology. Without hesitation, Duncan began his work of destruction, ripping cords and smashing screens, sparks flying in a frenzy of sabotage. The destruction was interrupted as more of Eisenwald's men stormed the room. A vicious close-quarters battle ensued. Duncan, his training and instinct in full display, fought with a ferocious intensity. He grappled with one assailant, knocking the gun from his hand and driving his fist into the man's face with a sickening crunch. Blood spurted, and the man crumpled to the ground. Klaus, despite his injuries, was a whirlwind of teeth and rage. He attacked with a ferocity that belied his pain, his loyalty to Duncan driving him beyond his physical limits. Duncan moved through the room, a man possessed. His gunfire was precise, each shot meant to kill. He ducked and weaved through the maze of servers and synthetic humanoid beings, his movements a blur of focused aggression. As the last of the attackers fell, Duncan turned his attention back to the servers. The room was now a scene of utter devastation, littered with the remnants of Eisenwald's plan and the bodies of his fallen men. With the servers disabled, Duncan knew the final confrontation with Eisenwald was close at hand. The air was thick with the impending climax of their deadly game. The festive lights, flickering erratically in the chaos, cast eerie shadows across the carnage. Duncan and Klaus, battered and bloodied, prepared to face the last phase of their mission. The stakes had never been higher. Failure was unthinkable. The building, once a place of joy and celebration, was now the epicenter of a brutal showdown. As they made their way towards Eisenwald's location, Duncan's mind was clear, focused solely on the task at hand. Every step was fueled by a blend of duty and unbridled fury. Klaus, limping but steadfast, remained at Duncan's side, a symbol of unwavering loyalty and courage. The final stretch of their night-long battle was upon them. The corridors of the Comcast Tower, once filled with laughter and music, now echoed with the somber sound of their approach. Duncan, with Klaus by his side, was ready to confront Eisenwald, to end the nightmare that had descended upon them. The showdown was imminent, and Duncan was prepared to face it head-on, whatever the cost. Duncan looked at Klaus, ready to ruin this fucker's Christmas. Klaus looked up with an understanding and determination in his eyes. "Och then, let's finish this," Duncan stated calmly, and off they went. Chapter 12. Showdown. In the heart of the Comcast Tower, an intensity lingered in the air as the final showdown between Duncan and Eisenwald was imminent. Duncan, every muscle aching, every breath a gasp of pain, stepped into the atrium, his resolve as firm as the steel beams surrounding him. The holiday decorations, now marred with the violence of the night, hung like tragic specters of their former joy. Wolfgang Eisenwald, a figure of calculated menace, stood waiting in the center of the atrium, his eyes, cold and unyielding, fixed on Duncan. "So the endgame is upon us," Eisenwald called out, his voice echoing off the damaged walls. "Ready to fucking die." The ensuing battle erupted with ferocious intensity. Duncan, his senses heightened to their limits, returned fire as Eisenwald unleashed a volley of bullets. They moved with lethal precision, ducking behind pillars and overturned furniture, their gunfire a deadly symphony in the vast space. Amidst the chaos, the haunting strains of "O Holy Night" played over the building's sound system, a surreal soundtrack to the violence unfolding. The melody, so often a symbol of peace and serenity, now underscored the stark contrast of their brutal dance of death. In a moment of sheer terror, Eisenwald aimed a precise shot at Duncan. With a protective instinct that defied his own pain, Klaus, wounded but fiercely loyal, leaped in front of Duncan, absorbing the bullet. "No, Klaus!" Duncan screamed, his voice laced with agony as he saw his loyal friend hit the ground. Enraged, Duncan's counterattack became a storm of vengeance. He lunged at Eisenwald, fists flying, every strike fueled by a mix of sorrow for Klaus and a burning desire to end Eisenwald's reign of terror. Their fight was brutal and unyielding, a clash of two warriors driven by their own convictions. Eisenwald was a skilled fighter, his moves calculated and ruthless. He landed a solid punch to Duncan's jaw, staggering him. But Duncan, driven by adrenaline and fury, fought back with a relentless barrage of his own. His fists connected with Eisenwald's body in a series of thuds, each hit a release of the night's pent-up rage. The fight escalated into a grapple, both men wrestling for dominance. Eisenwald managed to gain an advantage, his larger frame overpowering Duncan. He pinned Duncan to the floor, his hands wrapping around Duncan's throat. "You're out of your fucking league, hero," Eisenwald snarled, his face twisted in a victorious sneer. As Duncan struggled for air, the world around him beginning to blur, a miracle happened. Klaus, mustering every ounce of his remaining strength, launched himself at Eisenwald. His teeth sank into Eisenwald's neck with a ferocity that was both terrifying and awe-inspiring. Eisenwald's eyes widened in shock, a gurgled scream escaping his lips as Klaus tore into him with primal savagery. Blood gushed in a horrifying spectacle, painting a macabre picture as Eisenwald's body convulsed under Klaus's unyielding grip. With a final, gruesome effort, Klaus ripped out Eisenwald's throat, his jaws coated in the blood of the man who had brought so much terror to their lives. Released from Eisenwald's grasp, Duncan crawled to Klaus, tears streaming down his face. He cradled his brave companion, whispering words of gratitude and love. "You're the best, Klaus. You saved us all," he choked out, his voice breaking with emotion. Klaus, despite his grave injury, managed a faint wag of his tail, his eyes still holding that unwavering loyalty. The atrium, just earlier filled with the festivities of a holiday celebration, was now the scene of their brutal victory. The serene notes of "O Holy Night" filled the space, a haunting melody that seemed to mourn those who tragically lost their lives due to the senseless violence. The festive lights flickered above, casting an otherworldly glow, making all of this even more surreal. As Duncan held Klaus, the enormity of their ordeal and the cost of their battle sank in. The building was silent, save for the haunting melody that continued to play, a stark reminder of the night's tragic transformation. Amidst the devastation and the loss, Duncan clung to the hope that Klaus, his faithful friend who had stood by him through the darkest of times, would survive. The showdown was over, but its echoes would reverberate through the silent halls of the Comcast Tower forever. Chapter 13. Aftermath. The aftermath of the night's events hung heavily in the air of the Comcast Tower. Its grand atrium, once filled with celebration and a symbol of achievement, now lay in ruins, a stark testament to the night's harrowing ordeal. Duncan, cradling his injured companion Klaus, sat amid the debris, his body and spirit battered, his mind reeling from the night's brutality. As he gently stroked Klaus, whose breathing was labored and weak, Duncan's gaze wandered over the remnants of the festive decorations, now tarnished with blood and smoke. The contrast was jarring. The cheerful lights and holiday music, which still eerily played in the background, clashed with the scene of devastation around him. His thoughts were abruptly interrupted by the sound of voices and footsteps. SWAT teams and first responders flooded the building, their movements precise and urgent. Duncan's radio crackled to life with Thomas "Whisper" Wagner's voice, tinged with concern. "Duncan, report. Are you okay? What about the hostages?" "We've stopped Eisenwald," Duncan replied, his voice hoarse and tired. "But Klaus is hurt. We need medics here, now." Medics rushed to his side, immediately attending to Klaus. They worked quickly, assessing his injuries, their faces a mixture of professionalism and empathy. As they stabilized the brave dog for transport, Duncan's relief was palpable, though tinged with deep concern. The hostages, including Duncan's mother Emiko, were being escorted out by the SWAT team. Emiko, her face etched with relief and exhaustion, broke away from the group to rush to Duncan's side. "Duncan, my God, are you all right?" she asked, her voice filled with a mother's worry. Duncan managed a weak smile. "I'm okay, Mom. Just a few scratches," he lied, trying to mask his pain. Emiko hugged him tightly, tears in her eyes. "I was so worried." "You were incredible," she whispered. The reunion was brief as Emiko was ushered away for medical evaluation and debriefing. Duncan watched as she joined the other hostages, all showing signs of the night's trauma but alive and safe. Relief swept through him. They had survived Eisenwald's deadly game. As the first light of dawn began to filter through the shattered glass of the atrium, the full extent of the night's chaos became starkly visible. Bullet casings littered the floor, Shattered glass sparkled amidst pools of blood, and the once pristine walls were scarred with marks of the battle. Outside, the media had gathered in droves, their cameras and microphones poised to capture the aftermath of the siege. Reporters shouted questions at the emerging hostages and law enforcement, eager to piece together the narrative of the night's events. Duncan, aided by the medics as they tended to the wound on his side, luckily just a graze, made his way to the ambulance where Klaus was being prepared for transport. His concern for Klaus overrode his own pain. He glanced back at the building, its facade a haunting reminder of what they had endured. In the ambulance, Duncan sat beside Klaus, his hand resting gently on the dog's side. The events of the night replayed in his mind. The fear, the violence, the moment when he thought he had lost Klaus. The police captain approached Duncan before the ambulance doors closed, offering words of gratitude and support. "You did a hell of a job, Duncan. We'll take it from here. Get yourself and that brave dog some help," he said, offering a small, comforting smile. As the ambulance doors closed and it pulled away, Duncan's gaze was fixed on Klaus, his thoughts a mixture of hope and weariness. They had faced down a nightmare, had come out of it alive but not unscathed. The cost was high, and the road to recovery, both physical and emotional, lay ahead. The Comcast Tower, bathed in the soft light of dawn, stood as a silent witness to the night's ordeal. The events would leave an indelible mark on Duncan, the hostages, and all those involved. For Duncan, the aftermath was not just about healing his wounds, but also about coming to terms with the emotional toll of the night. And above all, it was about hoping for Klaus's recovery, his loyal companion who had stood by him through the darkest of times. Chapter 14. New Dawn. As the dawn's light gently washed over the city, the Comcast Tower, scared and somber, stood as a stark reminder of the night's tumultuous events. Inside, Duncan, his physical wounds slowly healing, reflected on the night's harrowing ordeal and the repercussions of Eisenwald's thwarted plan. Eisenwald's aim had been chillingly clear: to hijack the advanced AI integration technology. This AI, a marvel of modern-day advancement, was capable of not only being integrated with humans, but creating human-like beings. In Eisenwald's hands, it would have been a weapon of unimaginable power, capable of disrupting governmental infrastructures and endangering countless lives. The thought of what could have happened had he and Klaus not intervened was a sobering reminder of the fine line between safety and chaos in the digital age. In the veterinary hospital, Klaus, the unsung hero of the night, was making a steady recovery. The bond between him and Duncan had been the cornerstone of their survival. As Duncan sat by Klaus's side, watching his steady breathing, he felt a profound gratitude for the dog's loyalty and bravery. The media coverage of the event had been extensive, highlighting not only Duncan's bravery, but also bringing to light the dangers posed by the misuse of advanced AI technologies. Duncan found himself thrust into the spotlight as a hero who had prevented a potential global security disaster. Yet he felt a deep responsibility to use this attention not for personal acclaim, but to educate and advocate for better safeguards against such technological threats. Emiko, Duncan's mother, was a constant source of comfort in the days following the ordeal. She encouraged him to share his story, to help others understand the risks and responsibilities in an increasingly connected and digitally reliant world. As Klaus's condition improved, Duncan found solace in planning their future. Inspired by the events at the Comcast Tower, he became involved in initiatives aimed at preventing technological terrorism. His experience, harrowing yet insightful, provided him with a unique perspective on the importance of ethical AI development and the need for robust cybersecurity measures. The Comcast Tower, its repairs underway, stood as a symbol of resilience in the face of adversity. It served as a reminder of the night when the boundary between technology and terror had been perilously thin, and how the courage of a man and his dog had made all the difference. For Duncan and Klaus, life had taken on a new meaning. They had faced the darkest of threats together and survived. Their story, a dramatic blend of bravery, loyalty, and the fight against the misuse of powerful technology, would be remembered not just as a tale of heroism, but as a pivotal moment in the ongoing discourse about the role of technology in modern society. The new dawn marked not just the end of a long night, but the beginning of a new chapter, one where Duncan and Klaus would continue to stand as guardians, not just for each other, but for a world navigating the complex intersection of technology, security, and humanity. Epilogue. The Brothers Grimm. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over the city as Duncan walked out of the veterinary hospital. Beside him, Klaus limped slightly but steadily, his tail wagging gently. The German shepherd's recovery had been nothing short of miraculous, a testament to his strength and will to survive. As they paused at the hospital entrance, Duncan looked down at Klaus, a smile breaking through the weariness on his face. It was then that Duncan's gaze fell upon a white pit bull Rottweiler mix, sitting forlornly in a corner of the hospital's waiting area. The dog's eyes, a deep shade of brown, held a story. Duncan learned from the staff that he had been found and brought there. The dog only had a name tag. He looked up at Duncan with a hopeful expression that tugged at his heartstrings. Without a second thought, Duncan decided to take Sarge in. It seemed only right, a fitting continuation of the journey he and Klaus had begun. As they walked to Duncan's car, Sarge on his new leash, Duncan sensed the beginning of a new chapter. Klaus sniffed Sarge, and after a moment of canine communication beyond human understanding, seemed to accept him. Sarge, in return, looked up at Duncan with what could only be described as gratitude and loyalty. As they drove home, Duncan watched the two dogs in the rearview mirror. Klaus, with his noble bearing and scars of bravery, and Sarge, with his newfound sense of belonging, made an unlikely pair. Yet Duncan realized they were perfect together. In them, he saw a reflection of his own life, marked by struggles but also by the unexpected joy of new beginnings. Reaching home, Duncan helped the dogs out of the car. They explored the yard together, Sarge following Klaus's lead, already looking more at ease. Duncan watched them, a sense of peace settling over him. He had found purpose in the chaos, a family born out of the night's terror. "Look at us now, me and the Brothers Grimm," Duncan murmured with a chuckle, watching as Klaus and Sarge played. They were survivors, fighters, each with their own story of resilience. Together, they would face whatever the future held, a trio bound by an unspoken bond. As the sky darkened and the first stars appeared, Duncan knew that the horrors of the Comcast building would always be a part of them. But so too would the lessons learned, the strength gained, and the unbreakable bonds forged in adversity. With Klaus and Sarge by his side, Duncan stepped into the future, ready for whatever it might bring. The Brothers Grimm, as he had fondly named them, were more than just pets. They were loyal companions who would remain by Duncan's side through the thick of the fight. If you try to harm Duncan Wallace or those he cares about, there is a good chance that the Brothers Grimm will be the last faces you see in this life. To be continued.